Hello, and welcome to the Dr. Money Matters podcast, the show where we discuss important financial topics that were never covered in med school. I'm your host, Dr. Tarang Patel. Negotiation, that's what today's episode is about. It's one of those key life skills that makes many of us cringe and a few of us excited. But if you improve or have the ability to negotiate well, it can make a huge financial difference in your life. From the simple negotiating a $10 or $20 a month discount from your cable bill or cell phone bill to the saving thousands of dollars when dealing with a car dealership to potentially hundreds of thousands to millions of dollars in salary negotiations, which can have a much larger impact on your life than saving a few bucks by skipping your Starbucks latte, as many of us advise. If you can negotiate what you're really worth, it's going to have a much larger impact. Before we get started with today's guest, I want you to reach out to me and give me some feedback on how negotiation has helped you improve your financial situation, or if there's any areas where you wish you would have been able to negotiate better. So go to the Dr. Money Matters Facebook group, and you can, if you don't want to post detailed information by any I understand, you can message me and we can just do it as an anonymous discussion. But I think it's very helpful for listeners of this podcast and the members of the group to kind of bounce these stories off of each other, and we can all help each other improve our negotiation tactics. So my guest today is Dr. Robert Felberg, a neurologist in New Jersey who runs a negotiation training class for physicians. So we're going to be delving into negotiation tactics and how he was able to help other physicians achieve better outcomes through the negotiation process, and some tips and even a book recommendation or two. Okay, welcome to another episode of the Dr. Money Matters podcast. My guest today is Robert Felberg, a neurologist from New Jersey who specializes in teaching physicians negotiation tactics and negotiation skills. So we're going to talk a little bit today about the role of negotiations as it pertains to physicians. We'll just get started right into it. But Dr. Felberg, welcome to the podcast.
Well, thank you. It's a pleasure to be here. I've been listening to you for a while, so this is very exciting for me.
Good. I'm glad at least I have one listener, so that's good. Besides
I'm
my
the one.
So let me ask you. You're a neurologist. So before we talk about the negotiation aspect, let's just tell me a little bit about yourself, your background, how you got into medicine and neurology specifically.
Okay, so I'm a neurologist, as you said. I do stroke and neurocritical care, and I'm the director of a stroke program here in New Jersey, a comprehensive program. I think I got into neurology sort of the back route. I went into medical school thinking I was going to be an ophthalmologist and found I didn't really enjoy surgery. And then did a rotation in neurology in my fourth year, and I actually enjoyed it. I was able to diagnose what was then a newly recognized disease of tropical spastic paraparesis. I recognized one of the first cases in the Northeast, and was able to give a grand rounds on that. And I just found it fascinating, and I just went into it because I loved it.
Neurology specifically, but like just in general, what got you into medicine? I guess.
It was probably my mom convincing me from, before I was even born that they needed a doctor in the family.
There you go.
I knew I was going to be a scientist. My father was a biochemist, and I had a strong scientific bent. And in ninth grade, I was talking to a biology teacher that I had. And, it's always these mentors that they just sort of drop these pearls of wisdom. They're not thinking about it. It just happens. And he just mentioned to me, he said, Rob, you really have the background and the talent to think about medicine. And I never thought of myself as a physician until that day. And it just grew and grew. And then I think probably within the next year or so, it just became crystallized in my mind. And it was full speed ahead since then.
So how long have you been in practice now?
So I finished my fellowship in the year 2000. And so I'm working on, into my second decade.
So now let's talk a little bit about your interest in negotiation. What got you involved in that?
So I've been negotiating for a long time. Usually, it started off for personal negotiation. I can remember getting my first job and negotiating for my first job. And I remember I negotiated an extra $45,000 in salary. And I thought to myself, wow, that was really cool. I mean, I just made an extra $45,000 a year by just asking for it. And it got me very interested in the concept. And I just started reading about it and looking into it. And the more I did it, the more interested I became. And it started to get more formal. And I started to work with groups like the Caris Group and follow the Harvard Project of Negotiation. And it's always just been something that has been on my mind and has become probably the most important tool in my professional toolkit.
So when you're saying you negotiated that $45,000 salary increase, this is right out of fellowship?
Right out of fellowship.
So this is an interesting question that I think are a thought that a lot of newly graduating physicians have. They're coming out of residency, they're coming out of fellowship. You've never really been taught these skills and in medical school or residency, and you're not really sure if it's even a good thing. You don't want to have a bad impression, when you're trying to get a job. You don't want to upset the group that you really want to work with. How do you how are you able to, on your first shot, basically negotiate that, and then just kind of like how do you impart that skill set to other physicians, and how does that work?
So the way I was able to really do well on my first negotiation, and it was by accident, I must admit. Sometimes they say even a broken clock is right twice a day. And so what I was looking at sort of a hybrid position. It was, half academic and half private practice. And so I came in with the idea that they were going to probably try to offer me an academic salary. And I wanted to get somewhere closer to the private salary. So I did a lot of due diligence and found out what the average salary was. And I got my market value, right? So the most important piece of information you have in any negotiation is your market value, right? You don't know what something is worth until you know what something's worth, right? You wouldn't buy a car without going on the internet and looking at the pricing and what other people are paying for that car and what's a fair value. And so I was able to get that data. That was back when organizations like MGMA used to give away that data for free to physicians. They no longer do that. So I basically used that knowledge for leverage to increase my offer. But you asked a number of questions, and let me try to get to some of them. The first thing is that you are going to be expected to negotiate, and it's going to have to be you. It's not going to be your lawyer. I know a lot of people think, oh, you get a contract, you hand it to the lawyer, and the lawyer does the negotiation, but that's not how it works. By the time this contract is inked, the ability to change the numbers has been dramatically reduced. You've already contoured the edges of your offer. You can't really whittle away at the middle anymore. And that's a concept called anchoring, where a value has been laid down and it's difficult to move from that number. So anticipate that you will be the person who will be negotiating, and the negotiation usually starts around the time of the interview. Now, you have to be respectful, and you have to remember that the relationship is the most important thing in the negotiation, right? Especially in medicine. You're negotiating with your future bosses and your future partners, and you're going to work together for 40 years. So you don't want to be rude or be insulting, but at the same time, you will be expected to negotiate. When they give you an offer, the offer they are giving to you is a lowball offer. They are giving you they're anchoring a number that's low because they anticipate that you are going to come back with a higher bid. And if you do not negotiate, you will be looked upon as a pushover or somebody who doesn't understand the game. And remember, it is having a reputation as a fair and effective and savvy negotiator is a wonderful reputation to have, and this is how you start this. So you will gain respect and make the relationship stronger by negotiating in a respectful fashion. If you are afraid to negotiate, it's going to leave a question as to your leadership ability in the future. And everything is negotiable: salary, the starting date, vacation time, CME funds, number of FTEs. If you are a resident and you're just starting your fellowship, you can look into getting a stipend. All these things are up for negotiation. So keep that in mind.
Okay. So it's interesting. You mentioned you don't want to be looked as the pushover. Obviously, you want to not just get your fair market value, but you do want to develop an appropriate professional reputation in the practice that you're joining. So I think that's a very good point, is that you not just are you leaving money on the table or benefits or what have you, but you're leaving some respect on the table. And that's a key thing that I think, is underappreciated. So I'm glad you brought that up. So one of the issues, though, that now I think seems different is that, when you say you're going to be working, with this person for a long time, it doesn't seem that way in medicine anymore. It doesn't seem like, you're joining the practice down the street with, a colleague, and you're building something up from, growing a practice that person has started. It seems like most people are joining either hospital or employed positions, academic centers, or these mega groups now, and corporate type practices. Doesn't seem like there's much room for negotiation there.
Oh, it's the exact opposite. So you bring up a lot of really important points, and a lot of what you're saying is the reason why I am dedicating myself to getting the word out there about negotiation to physicians. It used to be that practice as a physician really was centered around your clinical skills. And you were the person in charge of your part of the practice. Maybe you were in charge of the entire practice. Maybe you had a partner or a boss. But the organizational chart, the bureaucracy, was very straightforward. And you were the doctor, you were the expert. What you said pretty much went. Now that's not enough. You can't just have strong clinical skills. You also need to understand finances. And I know there's a lot of great programs like yours that are trying to help physicians become experts in finance so that they are able to have a strong financial background. But you also need strong professional skills, because medicine is now more corporate than ever before. And when you are in a corporate environment, you are in what we call a matrix bureaucracy. And by matrix, I don't mean that wonderful movie where people learn kung fu by downloading stuff into your head. What it means is in a matrix environment, you have a lot of people that you intersect with. It's like a Excel sheet. And in each corner, at each intersection of the Excel sheet, there are people that you must interact with. And learning how to work in that corporate environment is very difficult because of all these different intersections. And we're not trained to do that. So, you're dealing with the nursing staff, the radiology staff, the emergency room staff. And the other thing that's typical about a matrix organization is that your title has little to do with your influence. So the most influential people may not be the chairperson of a particular department. It could be the person who specializes in the subspecialty or something like that. So it's a very difficult situation, and that's why I think a lot of physicians do not enjoy their practice as much anymore, because they don't understand what's going on. So part of the reason why I wanted to teach these professional skills is to try to give physicians some control back from the corporate standpoint, just like the concept of financial independence is giving doctors control back when it comes to finances. So when it comes to negotiation within a corporate environment, you actually have a lot more room. And so just to give an example, if you're joining a large practice, remember that you're working in a matrix. And so don't assume that the chairperson is the person that necessarily has the biggest say in where your salary is going to go. You're going to be interviewing with the nurse director, with the director of the emergency room, with the director of radiology, etc. And if those people really are impressed by you and your brand and what you can bring in from a standpoint of value to the program, they're going to show up to the chairperson and say, look, you're crazy. We need to hire this person. I don't care what it takes. We need this person in our program. And that gives your chairperson the opportunity to go to the board and say, look, the emergency department wants them, radiology wants them, even the nurses like them. We have to free up more than what we are able to offer to give this person the appropriate offer. And we don't want this person working across the street and taking all of our business. And that's something we need to take into account.
That's something that I think runs counter to what most of us have felt. And I think that's actually a positive. What you're describing is that we do have more flexibility. And obviously in the non-medical corporate world, negotiation tactics are a huge thing. And it does make a big difference. And so I think, we hear about all the corporatization of medicine, and we assume, sometimes rightfully, sometimes incorrectly, about the negatives. But I'm glad you brought up the point that it's actually even more important in corporate medicine. It's just not a linear type of model like we're so used to, and quite honestly, that's the way most of us were taught. Even to this day, I think in academic models, at least during training, as a resident, you're kind of in that hierarchy of the resident, chief resident, program director, section head, chairman, whatever. And we think of it as in a linear manner, but you don't think about the different branches. So it's a very good perspective, and so I'm glad people like you are out there talking about this, because it's an underappreciated skill. But now, that being said, negotiation is one of those things that I think a lot of people just feel like you're born with. You have someone who's a great bargainer. They can bargain hunt whenever they go shopping, or the classic example is negotiating when you buy a car. How do you teach someone that skill?
Sure. So I would agree with you. I think there are some people who are born to negotiate, and then there's the rest of us. I do think that the most important skill in negotiation is not that sort of bombastic wheeler dealer, slick guy kind of thing that you might think of as a great negotiator, but rather it's the person that's able to listen and learn what the other party wants, and then figures out a way to get what they want and get what you want at the same time, right? They want a program that's going to become the best in neurocritical care, and you are the neurocritical care physician with the skills to get them there. Let's figure out how we can work together so that we're both happy with our result. Those are the great negotiators. It is not too difficult for people to learn how to negotiate, especially physicians. Physicians are actually natural negotiators, even though they may not realize it. We all communicate every day, all the time, and most of us are very effective at communicating. We're used to risk-benefit analysis. We are also very quick on our feet, and we understand, that sometimes you have to make small sacrifices to get big wins. And we also understand the importance of relationships. So we make very good negotiators. We just have to overcome some of the negative things that we have, that tendency to allow other people to sort of, we sacrifice for other people. That's what doctors do. We're the person who leaves the house to go take care of somebody else and leaving our family. And also dealing with this bureaucracy. We've just been trained so long to just listen to the chairperson that we don't even think about it after a while. The secret to learning how to negotiate is, I think a lot of it is getting it down to your specialty. And this is the reason why it's almost impossible to get a strong, focused background on physician negotiation. There's really three models of negotiation out there. There's the wheeler dealer car salesperson who's more interested in, they want to close the deal, and they're not so much concerned about the relationship. There's the legal model, the attorney-lawyer model, which is all based on conflict. They're not there to save the relationship. They are there to argue tooth and nail and get the most they can for themselves and their clients. And then there's the mediator model. It's maybe the divorce counselor or the person that's working to air a grievance, and their goal is to get the peace they don't necessarily want to get what's the best outcome. They want to get the outcome where people stop throwing rocks at each other. And that's not physicians, right? Physicians have real things they need to negotiate, and it's all about relationship. So the thing with physicians is that physicians are very good at understanding theory. So I emphasize when I teach negotiation, the theory behind negotiation. When I explain to people the concept of an anchor number, of a market value report, of the various tactics of negotiation, and explain to them how they work and why they work. Once they understand the theory, it clicks nearly immediately. It doesn't take more than a 6 or 8 hours of education to make a physician a good negotiator. The other thing we obviously need is, though, you need to practice, and you need to practice in the setting of some sort of control. So it's kind of like ACLS. We spend the first half of the day teaching you the theory of ACLS, but it doesn't really click until you get there and you do your mock codes. And so part of what I do is I try to get people to do mock negotiations, and it seems to really help make everything work out well.
So tell me some of the successes you've had in negotiating. Obviously, you mentioned the first one where you were able to negotiate right out of fellowship that increased salary. But subsequently, give me an example of either a personal success or one of your students, the type of success that they've had.
So I'll tell you a recent student. I'm going to have to do my best to make sure I don't give away the identification because it's a very well-known person. But this is a person who's top in their field, who is practicing at an academic center, and they recently were approached by another academic center who came to them with a fantastic offer. So they wanted to figure out how to renegotiate the salary while also trying to get something reasonable, not necessarily able to match this other hospital that had a lot of resources because they already had roots in this local area. So we worked on a number of things. The first is we worked on getting the fair market value, but then also learning how to approach this in such a way as to not sour the relationship. I'm not sure where the negotiation's still going on out there. I'm not sure exactly where they are, but I know that the last time I spoke, he had almost doubled his initial salary. I think he went from $300,000 up to close to $700,000 at the last offer. So you can really move things well, and at the same time, he's very happy because he's built a relationship and a friendship with these people. So he's able to do it without souring the relationship. So I'm very happy with that. There's my personal favorite negotiation that I've ever done was, I do a lot of side gigs and I work a lot of hours doing telemedicine. And my family was getting a little upset with me because I was doing so much work, but it's so hard to turn down the income. And so we came to what I thought was a great solution, which was that 20% of all the income that I earn on my side gigs would go to a vacation fund. And then I would once a month or once every month, we would, spend some quality time together, spending some of that money that I earned on the side. Matter of fact, I'm leaving for Florida tomorrow with some of that cash. So I really like that solution because it allowed me to keep working and keep earning. It also respected the needs of my wife and my children. And also in the end, it turned out to be a great thing to reapproach how I was looking at the extra money I was bringing in.
Right. That's good. That's good. You got to reframe the situation. So I like. Now, are there any groups in medicine that you think would potentially see an outsized benefit from from not yours, but just in general from developing their negotiation skill?
Well, certainly if you are new to negotiation and you're looking at your first contract, you are at the greatest risk, right? Your first contract sets up your entire career. What you get paid in your first contract will determine in one way or another the salaries for the rest of your life. So if you're able to negotiate an extra $30,000 or $20,000 or even $5,000 in your first negotiation, and you assume you're going to be getting some raises over the course of your career and negotiating new contracts, that's going to balloon out to a couple $1 million over the course of 30 or 40 years. So that first negotiation is critical, and that's when you're most naive and you're most likely to be taken advantage of. I would also say, in my experience, I know this is a bit of a stereotype, but there's also, I think there's some truth behind it based on evidence, that women tend to be more reluctant to negotiate, and they are more concerned about ruining the relationship or being seen in a negative fashion. But the evidence out there suggests that women, when they negotiate, do just as well or sometimes better than men. I will say that there is a trick for women based on economic studies and studies of negotiation. And that is when men negotiate and they say, I can do this, it tends to get them more concessions, better outcomes. But women, if they use the we, they do better. So if I were a woman and I was negotiating, one of the tricks I would say would be something towards the effect of, we really need to think about ways to improve the salary and get it closer to the 75th percentile. We are the type of practice that hires the best, and I want to be part of a practice like this. And together we can really create things. That use of that communal we for women seems to help them a lot. But I would definitely say that women can negotiate well. They should not believe that they can sour the relationship, and I would say full speed ahead to trying to get the fair deals that you deserve.
Good. Yeah, I think it's critical. I mean, there was a report out in a recent podcast by one of my physician podcasting colleagues talking about the persistent, salary discrepancies, the gender gap in medicine. And they've accounted, I think it was a Doximity survey, but they've accounted for differences in, experience, specialty, and it still does persist. So anything that we, can help negotiate or help reduce that gap and basically eliminate that gap is critical. So getting these skills is definitely important.
And I would say, if you think about this term that we use, burnout, which is a very difficult term to describe because it means different things to different people. But definitely, if you feel as though you've been treated unfairly, right? You've negotiated a contract, you thought it was fair, and then you're a woman and in medicine practice, and you're working just as hard and you're just as skilled as everybody else, and you talk to your male colleagues and they're making 25 or 30% more than you. Wow, that is not a good starting point for your career. That's going to lead to you feeling that you're being treated unfairly. You are now,
because
angry.
You are being treated unfairly.
Absolutely,
it's not feeling it. You are being treated unfairly.
You are absolutely being treated unfairly. And what's going to happen? You're going to have to look at leaving the practice. You're going to have a lot of anger. You're not going to be viewing the administration as on your side, which would be a nice thing if it's possible. But if you're able, but the evidence suggests that if you try to negotiate, women negotiate just as well as men. I'm not saying that this is going to solve all the gender inequality issues of the world, but let me do what I can to help my women colleagues as best I can. And I strongly encourage that they get those skill sets and put them to use.
So, one thing that you kind of mentioned there, which, the burnout issue is true, is there is a lot of antagonistic feeling between, physicians and administration. And one of the things that you described, and I think some of it, we just tend to feel that that's inevitable. I mean, we've seen it wherever we've been, whether, in training, our first job, our second job, wherever. So some of it just feels inevitable, and we feel like, there's one side and there's the other side. But in all reality, we're all on the same. The goal is the same. The approaches may be different, but and I think that's a good point. That if negotiation is done well, everyone kind of feels like they've come out ahead.
Absolutely. So you are correct that there's going to be this sense of, the technical term would be conflict. Conflict is when there is a limited amount of resources and that, one or more parties are fighting for this limited resource. that the parties are interdependent on each other. The interdependence is a big part of it. And the other thing is that there's negative emotions, right? So if you and I work together and I say, hey, let's go get pizza, and you say, let's get Chinese food, and we just, come to it, okay, today we'll do Chinese, tomorrow we do pizza. That's it, we're fine. But if I say, let's get pizza, and you say, you'd never care about what I want or my feelings, suddenly it's like, wow, what just happened? So in the end, conflict management is its own important skill, and it's not something that we as doctors learn. But remember, as a physician, you are at a very strong disadvantage in every conflict that you go up against, because there will always be a sense of asymmetry. So you could be the person who's completely in the right, and there could be somebody who is just out of control, whatever it is, a nurse or whoever it is that really acted unprofessionally, and you respond back in a like manner. It doesn't matter. You're the doctor. You're never allowed to lose your cool, right? But then you go, okay, well, what if it's the administrator? They have as much power as I do. Well, the answer is, you're a physician. You are a high information party. And as a high information party, you are never allowed to, act in a certain manner. So you get it from both ends as a physician, man. And believe me, I've been there on both ends. In the end, the reason why negotiation is so important is because conflict minus emotion equals negotiation, right? If we can get rid of the emotion, and the emotion is important, right? Emotions are what we call internal facts. They're just as real as anything else. If you feel angry at me saying don't feel angry doesn't solve the problem, right? But if we say, I see you're angry, and we talk about why you're angry, if we can get rid of the emotions, then all we're left with is, what should we eat for lunch? Okay, well, I'll tell you what. I care about the relationship. I'm more than happy to have Chinese food, and that's it. We're done. But it's getting to that point is something that we as physicians are not taught. And if you're always on the losing side of conflict, especially if you are losing it through coercion, and there's all sorts of ways to express power. Coercive power is when the chairman says, I'm the chairman, and this is the way it's going to be done. And you're going to see 28 patients in the morning and 28 patients in the evening. And you have all the time in the world to do your research after 5 and before 7. That's not going to lead to good long-term happiness. And that's a lot of what I'm trying to do my best to help, is to try to give the physicians, we all are given our medical skills. And then the issue became finances. And now there's great people out there, helping doctors with their finances. And now the real issue to really succeed in medicine is your business and professional development, the ability to work within corporations, to negotiate third-party payers, to negotiate, your call schedule when it comes up, and they want you to work Christmas and Easter and every other holiday. These are all things that you need to really succeed and be happy with your career. Certainly, you can be a fantastic doctor and not know the first thing about negotiation. But if you want to be a happy person and really hit all of your potential, including bringing some of your wonderful ideas to bear to make your program and the healthcare of the community better, being able to negotiate is a big part of that.
You said that very well. One of the things you brought up in there, and this is a question. So we've focused so far on negotiations with your employer, and then some other issues that you brought up your family. But one of the where physicians really are frustrated is negotiations with third party, like insurance and stuff. What kind of success would we be able to see there?
So this gets into a very complex negotiation structure, and it's probably about the most difficult negotiation your typical physician who doesn't run a hospital system will look at. But I'll go through it very quickly, but there are some good courses out there. This is the type of thing where you usually bring in a third-party consultant to help you out. But basically what you want to do is take a look at your billing pattern, and you want to see which 3 or 4 third-party payers are really responsible for most of your income, and which codes are you most responsible for your income. And those are the ones that you really want to stick with. And then you want to look at the other payers and see what they are doing. So if you have 3 or 4 payers, usually what you'll find is you'll have 3 or 4 payers that are responsible for 80% of your return. And there's usually going to be 5 or 8 codes that you really do, right? And if you find that there is somebody out there who is underperforming, then you can go to them and say, we really need you to match everybody else. And if not, we're going to have to let you go. And so it really, when it comes to third-party payers, you have very little leverage. The only leverage you have is the take it or leave it kind of thing, where I can compare you to other people. You're not there. You need to match other people. The other thing you can try to do, this used to work, it doesn't work as much as it used to, is that you basically show that you have a large part of the community as it comes to a particular thing. You can say, look, we're a neurology group and we are taking care of taking care of 8,000 people with multiple sclerosis. And we figure there's 10,000 people with multiple sclerosis in this area, but you're underpaying us. And we really want to serve that population, but you need to match other parties. The other thing you need to do is you look at this, the reason why it gets so complicated is because oftentimes there are insurers that pay poorly, but that are sort of loss leaders. So for instance, you may have a doctor who gives you a lot of consultations and 30% of his patients come from one insurance product. And if you drop that insurance product, you may end up dropping that referring agent. So it gets very complicated. But in the end, what it comes down to is leverage, right? And leverage is information that you have that you can use to move the concession, the offer towards you. So if you can say, well, I get paid $100 and you're paying me $50, and if you don't pay me closer to $100, then we can't really practice. That's the leverage that allows you to move things. So the leverage you have is the leverage to drop them for somebody else. The information leverage about what other insurers are paying, and then the effect on the community. If you drop this insurance product and you're gonna then end up dropping 8 or 10,000 patients, those 8 or 10,000 patients will then have the opportunity to go to another product, and that's the other thing. But it's a very complicated one. In the end, what ends up happening in my experience is that you say take it or leave it. They leave it, and then they come back to you a couple years later with a better offer. So so you have to really think about that and go slow and make sure that you do not lose the good partners that you already have.
Right. And I think one of the things that you bring up there is a good point. Is just in general, you should always be optimizing and have a good idea of the metrics of your different payer mix and things like that, just so you have the basis of information, what you decide to do with it. And you mentioned that, in certain situations, it may be beneficial to hire a professional, negotiator for certain types of issues, but always good to have that information in the background so you kind of know what you're dealing with.
Yeah, one of the things that's really important to understand about negotiation, and that's one of the things that you learn as you get into the theory, is that you need to have a negotiation strategy. You need to know what the value is, the market value we talked about. You have to have an anchor number or a counter offer, that where you're going to open up the negotiation. You need to have this sort of zone of potential agreement, what we call ZOPA. You need to also have the walkaway number, right? The BATNA, the best alternative to negotiated agreement. If you don't know where to walk away, then you're just going to be whittled down until you no longer have any profit or goods thing. And then you also need to have what we call the WATNA, the worst alternative to negotiated agreement. Let's say you go in there and you tell every single insurance company that you do not want to practice with them, and they all say no at the same time. Right? That's the worst possible thing that could happen. So you need to make sure that you don't allow that to happen. If you don't think about it, it could sneak up on you.
Right. Good answers. And I think this is a lot of more stuff that we weren't really taught in medical school, but that's very important to the way we practice. So I'm glad people such as yourself are out there helping physicians succeed in learning negotiation. So tell my listeners where they can find out more about you.
Sure. So the best place would be my website, which is www.negotiationmd.com. You can find us just on your friendly internet server. We offer market value reports. We have a online course that's coming up. I also do one-on-one Skype sessions where I work with people with their negotiation skills, and we practice a few negotiations and give people advice. We have a blog as well. I think we're just trying to do our best to get the information out there in a way that's specifically customized for physicians, so that it directly can be useful in their practice.
Awesome. Well, we'll definitely be sure to check it out. I'll put a link of that on our show notes. And I want to thank you, Dr. Felberg, for coming on. And we're going to hope that our listeners, use your company, but also just in general, kind of think about their own fair market value and try to get their negotiating skills up to speed. Let me ask you one thing before I let you go. What is there's a pretty popular book out there, Never Split the Difference, by I think it's Chris Voss, if I'm not mistaken.
Mm-hmm, that's correct. Yeah. So that's a good book. I don't necessarily think it's the best book for physicians, and the reason being is it's all about using tactics and leverage to get the best deal, especially in high-level situations. As a physician, you need to be willing to give a little bit on the deal to maintain the relationship. That's the difference between physicians and hostage negotiators, right? Hostage negotiators are willing to say anything to get those hostages out. And if the guy says, wait a second, you lied to me, you don't care, the guy's in jail, right? But if you lie to your doctor colleagues, man, the next 40 years, you are a fink in their eyes. So I think it's a good book. I just would be careful. Don't make it your negotiation philosophy. If I had to recommend a book that I think physicians would be best served by, it would be a book called Bargaining for Advantage by Richard Schell, Shell. It's not specifically for physicians, but it really is more about gentle, not soft tactics that you can use to get what you want without souring the relationship. And it explains to you, where the relationship's going to go bad and how you prevent that, those sort of things. I think if, as a physician, it would be a good place to start. In the end, though, trying to learn to negotiate from a book is like trying to learn how to do surgery from your anatomy book from Netter. You got to get out there and do some mock negotiations, either in a formal or informal setting, but you got to practice, especially before your first one.
Great. Well, yeah, I appreciate you coming out, and we'll definitely put a link to the resources you mentioned as well as your website. I want to thank my guest, Dr. Robert Felberg, for coming on the show today and giving us a lot to think about in terms of how to improve our negotiation skills. I encourage you to check out his website, negotiationmd.com. It's linked on the show notes. And in it, he talks about his course, some other resources, and he also has a blog in which he delves into other topics such as finances. But the main message is that this is another skill that we were not taught in medical school, and yet we are supposed to know it, and we can do it well, but we can improve on it. And put ourselves in a much better position because the people we're negotiating against generally have better training than we do in this skill. So remember, you can improve this. Check out some of the other resources that Dr. Feldman mentioned too. And once again, let's continue the discussion on the Facebook group. Thanks for joining us on another episode of Dr. Money Matters. If this is the first episode you have heard, I appreciate you taking the time out and listening, and encourage you to listen to our past episodes. I would also appreciate you leaving me a positive review on Apple Podcasts, and also recommend you join our Facebook group where we have ongoing discussions about this and other topics in order to help each other reach our financial goals. Finally, I encourage you to subscribe to our email list and also to subscribe to the podcast itself on the various podcast app that you use in order to be kept aware when the latest episode comes out. More episodes of this podcast are available at www.drmoneymatters.com and on Apple Podcasts, Google Play, Stitcher, Spotify, or wherever you listen to your podcasts. Audio versions are also available on YouTube and Facebook. And you can follow me on Twitter at drmoneymatters or on Facebook or Instagram at Dr. Money Matters, all spelled out. Thanks for listening, and if you get a chance, please leave a positive review for this podcast, as it helps move the podcast up the rankings on iTunes and gets it exposed to a wider audience. Thanks for listening once again, and stay tuned for another episode coming soon.